Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine has sparked a fear. Could this be the start of a massive international war?
Ужас. Что тут думать?
What Putin likely thinks is that Ukraine will be left to stand alone. So let's look at what's going on with Europe, the United States, and the United Nations to see why the Russian president believes he can get away with it. The Second World War ended about 75 years ago, and it devastated Europe. Tens of millions of people were killed in just over 5 years of fighting. The entire continent lay in ruins. So Europeans are keenly aware, perhaps more than your regular cable news pundit, of what a continent-wide war means. And unlike Ukraine's allies further away, like the United States, its European allies are much closer to Russia. So while they recognize that Russia's invasion is disastrous and illegal, and that Ukrainians are suffering,
I am very, very scared for Ukraine. I am very saddened.
They're unlikely to get militarily involved themselves. Instead, some European countries have supplied Ukraine with weapons and wished it luck. They've also announced sanctions on Russia's economy, but Russia knows the Europeans can only go so far. And that's because Europe relies on Russia for energy. In 2021, 38% of the natural gas consumed by the European Union came from Russia. Germany, in particular, has become dependent on Russian gas as it shuts down its nuclear and coal power plants. And that could explain why Germany refused to send military aid to Ukraine until a few days after the invasion began. Now, right before the invasion, Germany did pause the launch of an $11 billion natural gas pipeline between it and Russia, but that pipeline's already been built. Russia's energy integration with Europe means that it has a pretty powerful weapon against sanctions. By reducing or cutting off natural gas supplies, it could devastate Europe's biggest economies. The United States has backed Ukraine during various periods of tension with Russia over the years. In fact, the US has even pushed for Ukraine to join the NATO military alliance, something it knew would provoke Russia. But American support has always topped out at providing military aid or imposing limited sanctions. And that's not likely to change this time either, because while the US military is the world's most powerful, it doesn't really have an appetite for taking on the world's second most powerful military. And domestically, President Biden knows most Americans don't want war with Russia. So while the US was warning for weeks that Putin would invade Ukraine, it was actually withdrawing the few US soldiers in the country, not sending more. Now, since 2014, the United States has supplied more military gear to Ukraine than anyone else, and it's promised even more sanctions. But like with Europe, Russia knows these measures can only do so much. With energy prices already high, the US is hesitant to impose meaningful sanctions on Russia's crucial oil and gas industries, because doing so could create worldwide shortages and even higher prices, and that's a cost that the US would have to bear as well. The United Nations Charter says that all members shall refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The UN was, of course, formed to promote international peace after the horrors of World War II, and the 5 permanent members of its Security Council are supposed to be leading this international order. But Russia's now the 3rd member of that council to invade a sovereign country just in the last 20 years. In 2003, despite opposition from most of its own allies and the United Nations, the United States illegally invaded Iraq with support from the UK. President Bush calculated, correctly it has to be said, that the US would not suffer any consequences. President Putin is making the same calculation, because over the years he's seen that it's not just a superpower like the US that gets away with ignoring international law. For example, Israel has not only illegally occupied land for decades, the US has recognized its sovereignty over the Golan Heights, land the UN says belongs to Syria. And under Putin, Russia itself has tested the limits of international law for years now. It attacked Georgia in 2008 and since 2014 has occupied and annexed Crimea from Ukraine. All the UN could do was issue resolutions asking Russia to give the territory back. Putin is betting the invasion of Ukraine will be met with much of the same. With Europe reliant on Russia for energy, the US unwilling to go to war, and the United Nations ineffective, the Russian leader knew he could invade his neighbor without risking World War III.